Welcome to the In-Between, where shift happens. This podcast is for anybody who has ever found themselves in that space in between what was and what's going to be. That space where life happens. The moment between where we are and where we're going. That space that is often uncomfortable to sit in. The stuff of life, the ups, the downs, the moments of connection and insight, and the moments where we can't see two steps in front of us. We will ask all the questions, maybe find some answers, and generally work at being okay in the mystery of the in-between. This is exciting because this is episode 1 of season 2. We're in season 2, and here we are kicking it off with a big one. And our really good friend Darrell Jones is here to hang with us, and Darrell might know a thing or two about mindfulness, and so I'm kind of excited about this one. If you are new to the podcast and have not listened before, the way this works is Darrell and I have discussed a topic, but Darrell does not know the questions that we're going to be asking and answering today. So I know the questions, Darrell doesn't, and we're just gonna see where this goes, which has led to some really cool conversations in the past. So I think it'll probably do the same today. So mindfulness in the midst of chaos. So I hear you have like a book about this kind of. So you kind of know this topic pretty well. So tell us a little bit about your book, who you are, what you do with it, how that shows up in the world, all the good juicy stuff.
Sure.
Or some of it.
Well, thanks first and foremost to having me on the In-Between. This is the land that I live in, the In-Between. Just a little bit of like my personal history. I've literally was born into the land in between as a biracial child. So I came out of the womb kind of going, wait. And the in-between is, to me, that's the space where growth happens. That's where learning happens. But it's not always easy, and rarely is it comfortable. So we are human beings that like to be comfortable. We are creatures of habits. Things that are quote unquote normal that we can control is what we aim for. And in my spiritual journey as a minister, well, just forget about being a minister, as being an individual, in my own journey of understanding what's going on in my life in the world, I realized that for a long time, I thought there was some spot I had to get to. There was some like knowing that needed to happen, and then life would be better. And so I approached this work very philosophically and thought, oh, there's this reason, there's this logic that I just have to understand strong enough, be able to regurgitate and apply in any situation, and then I'm good. And I didn't really pay attention to the word apply initially. So that's what it's all about, is how do we apply these great ideas and models and philosophical notions when we, open up the front door and walk out into our life. And that's what ultimately led me to writing my book, Soul Gym, a manual for connecting mind, body, and spirit for soulful living. Because as I did more and more of my own work and worked with other people, I realized that there was a void, there was a gap, there was I don't even want to say misunderstanding. I don't even know if there was a knowing for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Something needed to happen every day, that there needed to be some exercise taking place in order to keep us kind of at the edge of our growth, but in a conscious way, as opposed to kind of reacting and letting life happen to us. Right. And so the book was about, here are some exercises, not the exercises, but here are many fundamental exercises that can support someone on that journey, and they are sustaining practices, right? It's not about, oh, can I land this and score a 10 if I was to go to the consciousness Olympics? It's, right. Can I just stay flexible? Can I just stay strong? Yeah. And to me, mindfulness in the face or in the midst of chaos is not an exceptional place to be. That is what life is. Um, as much as I'm human and I want life to be easy, navigatable, understandable. If I'm honest, my life is chaotic just like anyone else's, and sometimes that chaos is really, really intense.
Yeah.
But most of the time it's manageable. But if we're honest with ourselves, we wake up and we may know what's on our calendar, we have our expectations, and then all of a sudden life throws you a curveball.
Yeah.
Just even today, my wife uh, um, had a kidney stone removed 4 days ago, and just didn't anticipate that it was going to knock her down for as long as it did. And she
Mm.
thought she was going to work today. And we woke up and started planning the day, and all of a sudden she's like, uh, I
Nope.
can't I can't lift anything. Like, I'm
Yeah.
in pain. This isn't going to work. So that's just an example of we have the best intentions, we have the best plans, we strategize, and yet we wake up and something shifts in
Yeah.
the day, and our capacity to meet that, to me, is what mindfulness
Yeah.
affords.
Yeah. And I think we love our goalposts. We love reaching the end and checking the box, and we know we did the thing and we can feel good about it. And yeah, it's like I start here and I end there, and rarely culturally are we taught to
Mm,
spend time in the middle, in that in between that we definitely talk a lot about here, and that you've been talking about, like spending time in that discomfort, in that middle, in that state in between, like, am I going to work? Do I feel
right.
okay? How do I feel right now?
Yeah,
and I
yeah,
and I think in some weird way we're taught to like almost ignore that discomfort and only look at like the win. Only look at the finish line. Keep your eye on the prize, like that whole
right,
thing. And
right.
I wonder how much that blinds us to um, what, like, I don't know. Like, I think it puts a weird tilt on words like chaos, or like, I think it kind of shows up the same way as like fear. Like, we're not supposed to have fear. You
Right.
shouldn't be but it's really not fear. It's the fear of fear. Like, we have become so afraid of fear, the idea of fear. We've become so
Mm,
fearful of
mm,
fear that you're not
mhm.
even supposed to recognize that you have it. And so I wonder if chaos is kind of that same thing. Like, it's become such a faux pas that my life is fine. I don't have chaos. And yet really,
Right.
like, don't we all? Isn't all of this just like in a very almost like scientific way? Isn't all of this just kind of chaos just happening
Yeah,
that we are a part of? Um, which actually kind of brings me to the next question, which is um, so I don't know that mindfulness usually gets brought up within the lens of chaos. I think we just talk about like, oh,
right.
we're going to practice mindfulness, and I'm going to, sit on my pillow in the morning before coffee and whatever, or whatever it is, right? Meditate. Um, and that feels like a very particular thing and a very
Mhm.
particular experience when we add chaos into the equation. When we talk about mindfulness in the midst of chaos, why is that something that we even need to be talking about? And
Yeah,
on one hand, maybe it sounds obvious, and on the other hand, maybe not obvious at all, because mindfulness has been such a unique thing, I think, for a long time.
yeah. Well, I have a response, but I want to clarify something and ask you a question. So,
Yeah.
what in your mind right now, when you say chaos, what does that mean?
Yeah, right. Well, that is a great question. I think it can mean I think it could probably mean a couple of different things. And chaos, like my go-to thought about chaos is like the world is burning down around us.
Mm,
Like everything has descended into chaos. There's no one's following any social rules or legal rules or what, and like it's just total chaos everywhere. And obviously, like that's not happening outside my window right now. I mean, or maybe hopefully not in my lifetime right here where I am. And yet I do
right.
think that is happening in certain parts of the world in a way that I'm way more aware of than in the past. And also I think chaos can also just mean like life itself, I mean, the evolution of life is chaotic. It's not like prescribed. It's not, I don't think so. I don't think that it is predetermined in any way. I don't think that life operates by any sort of like map or predestined ideas or anything. I think the way life is kind of chaotic in that sense, and that requires, like, in my mind, removing um the emotional reaction to the word chaos, and
Mm,
just kind of seeing, like, the objective, like, the chaos of, like, oh, any either this or this could happen in any moment, or this or this or whatever, and we have no idea in literally every second, like, the way the atoms show up and the way the decisions are made or the way whatever, like, that's totally chaotic in that
right.
sense, you know? Um, so I think, like you were saying, like, chaos, like, yeah, our lives are like, when we get really honest about it, I can love to think that my life is gonna be the way I say it's gonna be, and is
Hmm.
it really? No, right? Like, I don't actually have control over how anything shows up, you know? So, um, that's probably the version of chaos we're
Okay.
talking about, um
Uh,
but I think it could be any of the above. I mean,
yeah.
life can show up in all kinds of different ways, you know?
So, have you ever heard of or watched the show Naked and Afraid?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
I think
Actually,
it would be.
I used to, like, binge that show for a while,
Oh
not
yeah,
even gonna lie.
I did too. I think that there would be something very liberating and empowering, I think, if every person on the planet had to go through that for just 2 or 3 days.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
Not
yeah.
even, not even, a week, not even 14 days. Um, because that is a state of chaos to me. But
Sure.
within that chaos, there are principles, rules, and order.
Yeah.
So the chaos is confusion, which is
Mm.
is the way I like to think about chaos. Oftentimes, the words unorganized or disorderly get used, but to me, it's mostly about a state of confusion.
Mm.
And on those shows, the principles of fire don't change. The principle that if you are unsheltered in 32-degree weather doesn't change. The confusion is, how am I going to get myself sheltered?
Yeah.
The confusion is, how am I going to start a fire? The confusion is, how am I going to get calories in my body so I don't, start to shut down?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so the chaos to me most of the time revolves around the howing of life. How am
Mm.
I going to do this? How am I going to make this happen? How am I going to make myself available for X? How am I going to, draw into my bank account the amount of money that I need to pay these bills? How am I going to make my body resilient enough to handle whatever, impending illness might be around the corner? How am I going to have this really, really weird conversation where I don't really know what to say to that person, but I know we need to talk? I don't know how to do that,
Mm.
but we know what needs to happen. We know the conversation needs to happen. We know we need to pay attention to the health of our body. And the confusion is the chaos, and it's we don't know how.
Yeah.
But that's the in between. And that's on some level, all that we're here to do is to try to figure out how to do it. On those Naked and Afraid shows, depending upon someone's relative understanding of various principles and skills and ideas, um, but it was mostly their application, how well they were able to apply. And then not only the application, it was their mental and emotional presence that really made the difference in
Yeah.
terms of being able to apply things well. And to me, that's where mindfulness comes in. All of us have a relative understanding of things that we can do to further our life, but we don't know the exact path. So we're here to figure that out, and that's confusing, right? But some of us equate to being confused to not only meaning that things are disorderly, but oftentimes we attach our worth and our sense of well-being to it. So if we don't know how to make something happen, we can say that we are worthless.
Mm,
If we don't know how to make something happen, then we move into that state of fear where there's nothing to figure out. We're just going to fear itself, to use
yeah,
that quote.
yeah.
And it shuts down our capacity to apply what we actually know. And mindfulness is the concept of being present. That's it. But most of the time, we aren't. And that's where we get sticky. That's where we get into trouble because we try to think of, well, what happened last time? What did they do? And we start basing what we may or may not do on past experiences. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but to really recognize, oh, that was a past experience on another day and another time when a whole other set of things were happening in my life. I can probably replicate some of that, but there's something different about today that I can't control.
Yeah.
There's some element of things that I need to be really present to and be able to bring a little bit of that past knowledge and work it in and have some synergy take place. So to me, the way that mindfulness helps us live in this world of chaos is that it is a practice of being present. And in particular, the definition that John Kabat-Zinn brought forward was to be present with some level of purpose,
Mm,
and to do so non-judgmentally. And non-judgmental doesn't mean that we don't have judgments, but to be non-judgmental in our attention means we don't glom on and make a passing thought the reality, right? So if that idea is, oh my gosh, my life's out of control, I don't know what to do, I'm a worthless piece of crap.
yeah.
So we could hold on to that idea, I'm a worthless piece of crap, or we could just notice that it comes up and we're like, wow, the fact that I don't know what to do, I'm equating it to my inherent worth on the planet. That's not a great thing, but I'm going to keep breathing and, recognize, okay, it's here. It's Tuesday, April 2nd, this time of the day. And I gotta stay present because there's something about me that can handle this. And there's something about me that quote unquote can't handle it, but it's not that I can't handle it. I just don't know what to do. But the next moment's going to reveal it. Um, Whenever I teach mindfulness, the big thing that I like to differentiate, and this is why I wrote the book Soul Gym in terms of that idea of exercise, is that there's disciplined exercise of mindfulness and then there's living mindfully.
Mhm.
Everybody wants to live mindfully without doing any disciplined exercise. So if I want to run a marathon and I have no desire to do any sort of training, I'm going to have a pretty hard time. It's going to be chaotic trying to run a marathon. But if I follow some exercises and I do a little bit of, cardiovascular and strength training and various things throughout the day, when it comes time to step into that marathon, there's going to be a lot of other variables that I can't control, but I have controlled this idea of how I can show up in it and meet the physical, mental, and emotional challenge that's inevitably going to await me. So it's only in those disciplined exercises that we make ourselves strong and flexible to handle what's there. So with mindfulness, to have regular exercises, which could be meditation, which could be, there's not just one way to be mindful, but that is kind of the big way.
Yeah.
It's through that regular exercise that we have strengthened our capacity to be present. We have stretched our capacity to be agile in the midst of uncertainty. So then we step into something that feels chaotic and we still don't like it, but we can meet it. And
Yeah.
that to me is the thing. We do the disciplined practice so that we can live mindfully.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so it's interesting. I'm like going down the list of quite like, oh, check, check. I'm like, oh, I swear, everyone, we did not pass along the questions ahead of time. But I want to go back to this naked and afraid thing for a minute because I think it's just
Yeah.
such a brilliant example for a lot of reasons about mindfulness and the conversation we're having. And one of the first things that came up to me when you're talking about it was like, I think in a lot of spiritual practices, if we're gonna let's call them that for a second, I think it's really
Mhm.
easy to put them in a vacuum and like mindfulness is this thing and it's here and I do it this way and I practice it in the whatever. And um I'm going to practice mindfulness now, you know, like,
Right, right, right.
yeah, you know, I don't know. As opposed to like, I think socially, like we were talking about before, about like the milestones, the, the check boxes, reaching the goal and whatever, and putting our focus off in the future, or you were talking a little bit about like we gauge our experiences based on what's happened in the past, and so it's really easy for our mind to be way out there or way back there. And what came to mind about the whole naked and afraid thing is it almost throws you into a situation where you have to be so present to what's happening right now because like you're walking from the forest to the beach and the sand is burning hot and you have no shoes. Like there's
Mhm.
nothing more mindful than moments, those kind of moments of like how long can I keep my foot on the ground before it starts hurting before I have to take the next like hop step,
Yeah,
you are
yeah,
so in that moment. And at the same time, I think it also puts into perspective how our level of mindfulness also then informs what we know about the past and what we think might be happening in the future or what we think might need to happen in the future. Because if you're just out in the wilderness, and I love how that's it's always like there's that one person that really has like they've really like studied and they've practiced this for years, and then the other person is always the one who's like, yeah, I never really like studied anything, but I've always been out, like I've my whole life I've been outside, like
yeah.
and it's that application versus knowledge. And if we can figure out how to like marry the two, utilize the two at the same time, it's a balance.
Mhm,
There's a balance, right? And so there's a
mhm.
balance of mindfulness in the moment, being mindful enough that uh we don't end up in like the doom spiral of, oh my god, well this is what's happened in the past and I'm doing it again. Like I think there is like a weird like overthinking version of mindfulness where we can
Mhm.
overthink our way into that doom spiral. um or in this case it's like, all right, well we need to get food and water. We don't have food and water right now, and oh my god, we're never going to get food and water, we're going to die out here. Or, okay, we don't have food and water right now. What can we do to get the food and water? And it's like, I don't know. And maybe it's just because I have spent a decent amount of time in my life, like out, definitely nothing naked and afraid, but like,
Yeah,
camping, backpacking, hiking, whatever, that
yeah.
I can totally get that. Like, if you're like, you know, okay, we have 8 hours to get from here to 10 miles away from here, and we're each carrying 30 pounds and water, and there's water here and here, whatever. And um, yet there's a level of trust of like, okay, we have done some preparation here that
Right,
we will reach this point to refill our water. Um, what an amazing metaphor all of that is for how useful the practice of mindfulness can be in our lives, because I don't know that I really think about my day or my week or my month the way I think about like a backpacking trip.
right.
And yet maybe hmm that might be really helpful, right? Like, yeah, I trust the map. I trust that the water is going to be at that water. If the water is not there, well, there's another stream and we have iodine tablets, so like we're
Mhm,
good.
mhm,
You know what I
mhm.
mean?
Absolutely.
Like, yeah, there's a whole level of I guess trust is really the key here. That along with mindfulness comes like a necessity for trust, maybe, that like we can place our trust in the doom spiral and the stories of the past and the whatever, and the fear of like it's never gonna work out, or whatever the situation is.
Right.
um or we can, I mean, I guess we get to decide what, at some level we get to decide what we want to place our trust in, um which makes me think about, and I guess this is also kind of where you were going with it, the difference between like knowledge of and application, and that there needs to be a balance, because I think the typical image of like mindfulness and meditation is like, it's kind of like that, yeah, that daily practice of sitting on the pillow and doing the meditation. So and that's
Right.
great. I'm not knocking that in any way. Um, but if it ends once we get up off the pillow, then okay.
Yeah.
And I think there's a difference between like when life seems to be working, it's kind of, I don't know, it can be fairly easy to be like, oh, I'm just going to be, oh yeah, mindfulness, right? So like when somebody's new to mindfulness or they're not quite buying into it yet or whatever, like
Hmm.
what's the process of getting from like reactionary to, how do I remember to be mindful in the moment, like when the thing is happening? How do I
Right.
remember to be mindful? And then like, and then what? Like, okay, I'm mindful, I'm freaking out. I'm mindful that I'm freaking out. Now what?
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I mean, that's it. If people can be, most people aren't aware that they're freaking out and that there's another choice.
Uh,
If
yeah.
people could realize, oh, I can do something else other than freak out, or maybe I can just step back one click of my freak out, life will change dramatically. The the as you were sharing, Dan, what came into my mind, I think one of the challenges that we have with this idea of chaos in our life is that it is something to be controlled. And there
Mm.
is something that we are going to do that is somehow eventually going to stop chaos from
So,
happening.
so if it's chaotic, it's wrong.
Right.
Ah, yeah. Yeah, right.
And
Mm.
and I mean, we can't control anything. The only thing that we can hope to control, and I say hope to
Yeah,
control, is what's going on inside our head and our
yeah, yeah.
hearts. That's it. Out once we leave our skin, all bets are off. We
Yep.
can't control anybody. We can't control the weather. We can't control politics. We can't control governments. We can't control even the people that we trust. It's not that we shouldn't trust them, but we can't control what they're going to do. They're going to live the life they're going to live.
Yeah.
So, in terms of trust, you use that word a number of times. The trust has to land here.
Mm.
And it's not that I'm going to control myself, but trust that I am enough to handle whatever is there.
Yeah.
And that's one of the pillars of mindfulness. There's 9 attitudes, and one of them is trust.
Ah, wow.
Um, the others are the beginner's mind, which comes out of that Buddhist context, of like, if I think I'm an expert and I know everything, and this gets us into the
Mhm.
dicey relationship with chaos, we want to be an expert. So we want to know everything. But as
Yeah.
soon as we think we're an expert, we put blinders up and we are missing possibility. So acceptance is a huge attitude. We
Mm.
must be willing to accept regardless of our opinion. And that's where most of us get caught up. Is acceptance means we have to like something. Nope.
Oh,
You don't
yeah.
have to like anything to accept it.
Yeah, yeah. This is what
And
is.
that's
Yeah.
it is what is. And that's, to me, where part of the liberation starts to come in. And so, to go back to that idea of starting a mindfulness practice or starting a meditation practice, you don't have to like meditating in order for it to start benefiting you. People think they need to like have this super like, oh my God, I just want to feel so good and peaceful and like float 2 inches above the ground and like
Yeah.
totally zoned out. And it's like, no, dude, it's Monday morning. You got a lot of crap to do this week. Like,
Uh,
your
yeah.
mind's going to be jumping all over the place, but are you willing to sit in the midst of your mind going a little bonkers for just 2 minutes?
Yeah, and even just
And if you think,
recognize that your mind is going a little bonkers. Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
And the thing is, it's like, that's the chaos. Are you
yeah.
willing to sit in the chaos of your own mind? Forget about 2 minutes, 1 minute, 60 seconds,
Right.
and just breathe and know that you can get back up and go back into life and thinking you're going to control and manage everything and everyone. But for 1 minute, you're
For
willing
1
to
minute.
sit in the chaos of letting go.
Yeah.
Um, and you start doing that on a regular basis, that is something that really then starts to slowly translate into those moments where we freak out. Do we
Yeah.
stop freaking out? No, but all of a sudden, there's just a little bit of space. And that little bit of space is where empowerment and choice dwells.
Yeah.
And sometimes we may actually choose something that's different than our old habits and behaviors, but most likely you won't, because we
Yeah.
are creatures of habit.
Yeah.
So it's this mindfulness is not a fast thing. It is not an intellectual thing. And that's where most people, I think, lose sight of its power, because it's something, oh, I know what mindfulness is. I'm just going to be more mindful. No, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
You're going to default back into what you've been practicing your entire life.
Yeah.
And if someone comes up to your face and says, you suck, and you punch them, you're probably going to punch the next person that comes up and says something that you think means you suck.
Yeah.
It's just, it's if that has been the reaction, if that has been the normal behavior, whether you've liked it or not, that is the default tendency. And we always default.
Yeah.
And it's only through a willing practice of seeing our default, questioning the default, accepting our default, trying to stretch outside of our default, making mistakes, and then trying again and again and again and again and again.
And even I think rewriting the default, right? Like
Mhm.
we can't now it doesn't mean we never get I think this is a common misnomer. Like we never erase or get rid of our past or
Right.
old. So like that groove in your brain is still there,
Mhm.
and we can rewrite a new default. So then, because like you're saying, like a vast majority of the time, we're going to react to things based on our default systems of thinking and belief and habits and patterns and all the things.
Yep.
Um, and like for me, just knowing that it is possible to change what that default is just opens up this whole like world of possibilities.
Mhm.
And it is not a quick, like, take a pill and you're good to go, right? It's that
Yeah.
it's I like to think of it as like this. You mentioned mindfulness just opens up this little bit of space,
Mhm.
and then a little more space, and a little more space, right? And I think it's just like when we first start looking internally, I guess when we start looking at ourselves, paying attention to ourselves, I think we realize we're probably in this like chaotic like circle of like mess, and it's one thing to the next to the next to the next to the next, and you're like, oh my god. The mindfulness kind of creates this like off ramp from that, and we enter this like upwards and outwards spiral. And
Mm.
so the events of that initial like chaos are so close together that they all like overlap. When we add a little space, it's just a little bit of space between this event and the next event. But
Yeah.
as we become more familiar with it and then go on the spiral, because it's not just spiraling in like a cylinder, it's also a cone, right? So the
Mm.
space grows wider in between. So we are now looking at the initial event from a higher elevation, but we also have a little bit more space and a little bit more space and a little bit more space in between the events that we are reacting to. And we're reacting from a different place. And it's like, oh, I can breathe.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't know. For me, it was, I don't know, my mindfulness journey was like, it was a very long time of realizing after the thing happened how I reacted.
Absolutely.
And then
Absolutely.
the afterwards reaction got a little bit earlier, a little bit earlier, a little bit earlier until eventually, at least some of the time, I could recognize while it was happening. And then every once in a while, it was like I could sense it coming and react differently because like, oh, I know this feeling. I know this reaction. I don't want to do that. I'm gonna do
Mhm.
it differently. And it's like, holy shit. They
Mhm.
have the different they have the different thought. And I think that's really where that spiral I started to look like it was like looking down the spiral, going like, oh wow. That event is
Reconcil
totally different than I thought it was.
reconciliation is such a huge part of mindfulness.
Mm,
I mean, mindfulness is a process. It's not a destination. It's not a static state.
yeah.
And to your point, most of the awareness that we have, especially at the beginning of the journey, is an afterthought. We look back and we go, "Oh God, I said that again. Oh, I stepped in that pile of shit.
Yeah.
Oh."
Yeah.
And so we have to reconcile that. And most people don't. They stop and they go, "I'm horrible. Life is horrible. They're horrible. This doesn't work." And they throw up their hands. But you have to be willing to reconcile um, those
Mhm.
things. I want to say to anyone who's listening, in terms of thinking about chaos, right now, everybody has the capacity to handle chaos, but we are not equal. Depending upon
Mm,
our life experiences, depending upon who we are in the world in terms of what is afforded us just by the fact of us walking into a room, the financial means that we have, our family history, so many things add into it, but we
yeah.
do not all have the same capacity to be resilient or to be mindful in the midst of chaos. So be very, very, very careful of comparing yourself to someone else.
Mm,
Mindfulness is not a game of comparison.
yeah.
It is an exercise in getting aware of you, the most important person on the planet. And so within that, there's a very dangerous edge to the mindfulness world
Yeah.
that goes unchecked sometimes, and especially in relationship to meditation, where people say, "Oh, you're just not meditating enough."
Yeah.
But the very
Yeah.
practice of meditation itself can be very chaotic for someone. And,
Mm,
and, and I just have to bring in the word of trauma. Depending upon
yeah.
someone's experience of trauma in their life, closing your eyes, which is what most people think meditation is, you don't have to close your eyes to meditate. You can keep them open. You can stare at something. There's, so many different ways to practice it. But doing more of a thing that creates more chaos within isn't necessarily going to strengthen you to handle more chaos
Yeah.
if you push yourself to the point of complete and total fry and shutdown.
Yeah.
So that is not what this work is about. Trying to push ourselves as hard as we can. We're not trying to throw people into the deep end and say, "Oh, you'll figure out how to swim."
Yeah.
This is an exercise of compassion and empathy and understanding and kindness, and letting any intentional moment of getting present to ourselves be enough,
Yeah.
whether it be on the cushion, whether it be for 3 breaths, whether it be putting your hand on your heart and your hand on your stomach and just feeling the rise and fall of one breath, whether it be chanting an om, whether there's so many
Yeah.
different ways to,
Yeah.
to practice it, but there's not a prescribed perfect right way to do this. The only quote unquote outcome that anyone should ever aspire to in this practice of mindfulness is getting present and aware.
Yeah.
That's it. If you are present and aware that you are uncomfortable, let that be enough and take a deep breath and step back.
Yeah.
That's the beginning. That is the beginning. That is the continuation. That is the sustaining practice, being aware. That's it. There isn't a certain way that you need to be or need to look or have to practice in order to do this right.
Yeah.
But there must be some sort of practice. That's it. So I just wanted to throw that out there because I feel like a lot of harm can be and has been done
Yeah.
in the name of mindfulness and meditation, where it becomes shoulded on someone, and that doesn't help. So, for anyone who wants to
Mhm.
start this and you've never done it before, you can start doing this in 10 seconds or 15 seconds. The
Yeah.
key is, are you willing to try it out for 7 days or 14 days for 10 or 15 seconds in a row and begin building a little bit of a quote unquote new normal, or just the capacity to hold your attention and awareness in that space of discomfort for 10 seconds,
Yeah.
because that is the chaos, right? And your capacity to meet it with kindness and empathy will start to grow as soon as you start to do it a couple of times in a row. And lo and behold, just like if you're trying to balance on a bike and you can do it for a few seconds and you keep trying it every day, you're going to get to the point where all of a sudden you're just balancing. Now, might you still be going in a crooked line? Absolutely, but you're going forward.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know? So,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the flip side of comparison too is back to that idea of there's a right way. I think it's really easy to fall into, I need there to be a right way, so that I can say you're doing it wrong because I know the right way, because
mm,
then I
mm,
can feel really good to know that I'm doing it the right way and that I'm not missing the mark or whatever. And so I think and I'm sure that there are many other angles and perspectives to look at this too, but I think that's been another kind of dangerous and slippery slope, is like comparison in, oh, they're so good at it and I must suck, or I must be so good at it and so I have to be so much better at it than you, so that
right.
I don't have to look at the idea that I don't know that I'm good enough at this yet, or whatever. And so I think that, yeah, the, you said something about the, like, all the harm done in the name of, and it's like, oh my God, it's the mindfulness crusades.
Yeah. Listen, man, it doesn't matter what the
Mm.
teaching is. If the person offering it holds it in a way, it can always be a sharp-edged sword,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
unfortunately.
Hmm. All right. So to wrap this up, one thing we always like to end with some sort of takeaway. What's one
Yep.
thing that anybody can do right now to begin practicing mindfulness in amidst chaos, like kind of no matter what? Like, what's the one thing, the default go-to practice or tip, trick, key, whatever?
Yeah. So the practice that I love, it's called the STOP technique. It's an acronym. Stop what you're doing, take 3 breaths, observe, and then proceed. That's
Hmm.
it. So like right now, we could take a deep breath in and out, 2 more in, out, a third in, exhale and observe for a second, and then we wrap up the podcast.
Yeah.
That's it. We were present, in the midst of that. I was very present, that I was watching time and feeling
Right.
that, like, does that feel comfortable? No, to feel time pressure. And at the same time, that's just what was. And we
Yeah.
were both mindful. We were present and available to as much as we can, inside and outside. And to
Yeah.
stop and take 3 breaths. You can only breathe 1 breath at a time in meditation anyway, you know? So 1 breath is a meditation. If you can't handle 3 breaths, 1 mindful breath. And mindful just means you pay attention to the inhale and the exhale, and then you're done.
Yeah.
So you've meditated.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the takeaway.
And what a shift. I mean, even in those 3 breaths of moving from, for me, like literally my thought process of like, man, the last 10 minutes of this thing flies by and there's so much more
Yeah.
that we want to get in here, to take the 3 breaths and go like, yeah, there's always going to be more that we want to cram in here. And, or is it, do we hit the time mark we're trying to go? No, but does it matter? Also, no. And that's okay. So
Yeah.
what a calming, relaxing, yeah, just in 3 breaths for sure. Love it.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, man, dude, thank you for being here. This has been an amazing conversation, as we knew it would be. We may
Let's,
have to do a part 2, so I don't know. Maybe we'll talk
let's
about
do it.
that. So appreciate
Let's
you
do
being
it.
here and sharing with us everything that you have to share, and appreciate you all being out here listening and watching. And yeah, welcome to season 2 of the In Between, where shift happens, and we will catch you at the next one in the In Between. Nobody really enjoys being in the in-between, but thanks for being here anyway. We may not have found all of the answers, but certainly some, and maybe more importantly, a little shift has happened. Because that is really what it's all about, learning to be curious, authentic, and yes, maybe even a tad bit vulnerable. And the beauty of it all is that we are not alone in the in-between. So until next time, we hope a lot of shift happens.